Chapter 1. Laying Plans. Before a single soldier moves, a war is already being won or lost. Not on the battlefield, but in the quiet room where the plans are weighed. War, the book begins, is a matter of life and death for the state, a road that leads either to safety or to ruin. It is the one subject a ruler cannot afford to neglect. So the analysis opens cold and methodical. 5 constant factors govern every campaign. The first is the moral law, whether the people are in true harmony with their ruler, willing to follow him into danger without fear for their lives. The second is heaven, night and day, cold and heat, the turning of the seasons. The third is earth, distance, the open ground and the narrow pass, the chances of life and death written into the terrain. The fourth is the commander, measured by wisdom, sincerity, benevolence, courage, and strictness. The fifth is method and discipline, the way an army is organized, supplied, and controlled. From these 5 flow 7 blunt comparisons. Which ruler holds the people's loyalty, which general has the greater ability, which side enjoys the advantages of heaven and earth, where discipline is firmer, the army stronger, the officers better trained, and the rewards and punishments clearer. Weigh these honestly, and you can forecast victory or defeat before the fighting ever begins. This is the book's quiet revolution, war treated as a problem of measurement rather than courage. But measurement has a twin, and its name is deception. All warfare, the text says plainly, is based on deception. When you are able to strike, appear unable. When you are active, seem inactive. When you are near, make the enemy believe you are far, and when far, make him believe you are near. Hold out a bait to lure a greedy opponent. Feign disorder and crush him. If he is quick to anger, provoke him until his judgment slips. Attack him where he is unprepared. Appear where you are not expected. None of these moves can be fixed in advance. Each answers the living moment. And the chapter closes on its hardest idea. The general who wins makes many calculations before the battle is fought. The one who loses makes few. Many calculations lead to victory and few calculations to defeat. How much worse, then, for the side that makes none at all. Victory belongs first to the mind that has already won the war on paper. Everything that follows is the working out of that single page. Chapter 2. Waging War. Victory has a price, and Sun Tzu wants you to read the invoice before you celebrate. Put 1,000 swift chariots and 100,000 armored soldiers into the field, supply them across 1,000 li, over 300 miles of road, and the cost at home and at the front, down to glue and paint and the mending of wagons, runs to 1,000 ounces of silver a day. An army is a fire that must be fed every hour it burns. From that single fact the whole chapter unfolds. When you actually fight, if victory is slow in coming, weapons grow dull and the men's spirit sags. Lay siege to a walled town, and your strength drains away. Keep the army in the field too long, and the treasury at home cannot bear the strain. And here is the danger that ends empires. While you stand exhausted and broke, other rivals rise to take advantage of your weakness, and then no counselor, however wise, can undo what follows. So the book reaches a conclusion that sounds almost like a paradox. We have heard of clumsy haste in war, the text says, but we have never seen cleverness paired with long delays. There is no instance of a country that ever benefited from a war it dragged out. The practical engine of speed is supply. The skillful commander does not call up his people twice or haul grain across the country 3 times over. He brings equipment from home, but he feeds his army from the enemy's fields. 1 wagon of the enemy's provisions is worth 20 hauled from your own land, because that second wagon costs you the long journey and the people who go hungry to fund it. Even captured chariots and captured soldiers are folded into your own force, treated well and used, so that beating the enemy actually makes you stronger rather than poorer. Underneath all the arithmetic sits a moral claim the chapter saves for its final line. The leader who understands these things is the arbiter of the people's fate. The one on whom it depends whether the nation rests in peace or is plunged into peril. War, in this book, is never a game for a ruler's pride. It is the people's blood and treasure, spent. Chapter 3. Attack by Stratagem. The finest victory leaves the prize intact. To capture an enemy's country whole is better than to shatter it. To take his army, his regiment, even his squad entire is better than to destroy it, because a ruined kingdom is a poor reward, and a wrecked army cannot be turned to your use. From this comes the most famous line in the book. To fight and win 100 battles is not the height of skill. The height of skill is to break the enemy's resistance without fighting at all. So Sun Tzu ranks the forms of war from best to worst. The highest generalship attacks the enemy's strategy itself. You defeat the plan before it ever moves. Next best is to break his alliances and leave him isolated. Below that is to attack his army in the field. And the worst, the policy of last resort, is to besiege a walled city. Months spent building towers and earthworks while soldiers die by the thousand against the stones. The general so consumed by anger that he hurls his men forward like swarming ants. That is the portrait of a commander who has run out of better ideas. The skillful leader, by contrast, subdues the enemy without battle, takes cities without a siege, and overthrows kingdoms without long campaigns, keeping his own forces whole, so that his triumph is complete. Then the chapter turns practical with a rule of proportion. If you outnumber the enemy 10 to 1, surround him. 5 to 1, attack him. 2 to 1, divide him. If you are evenly matched, be ready to give battle. If weaker, be ready to retreat. If hopelessly outmatched, slip away, because a small force that fights stubbornly only becomes a prize for the larger one. Sun Tzu then warns where defeat is really manufactured. At the top. A ruler ruins his own army in 3 ways: by ordering it to advance or retreat when it cannot obey, by trying to run it the way he runs a government, and by meddling in a command he does not understand. Each breeds confusion, and confusion invites the enemy in. So he names 5 things that decide who wins. He wins who knows when to fight and when not to fight, who knows how to handle both large and small forces, whose ranks are united in a single spirit, who is prepared and waits for an unprepared enemy, and who has an able general the sovereign does not strangle with interference. And it all gathers into one line that has outlived every empire that ignored it. Know the enemy and know yourself, and in 100 battles you will never be in danger. Chapter 4. Tactical Dispositions. The great fighters of old, this chapter says, began with something strangely passive. They made themselves impossible to beat, and then they waited. Becoming invulnerable is entirely in your own hands. Whether the enemy ever gives you an opening is up to him. So you can know how to win without being able, yet, to make it happen, and the wise commander accepts that gap instead of forcing the issue. Security against defeat is defense. The chance to defeat the enemy is offense. You stand on the defensive when your strength is merely sufficient, and you attack when it is overwhelming. And then comes a line that turns the whole heroic idea of war on its head. To foresee a victory that is already obvious to everyone is not true skill. To fight, win, and have the whole world say well done is not the height of excellence either. Lifting a single hair takes no strength. Seeing the sun and moon proves no sharp eyesight. Hearing thunder is no sign of a sharp ear. The real master wins so early and so quietly that there is nothing left to applaud. His victories bring him no reputation for wisdom and no credit for courage, because he conquers an enemy that was, in effect, already beaten before the fighting began. He places himself where he cannot lose, and he never misses the enemy's moment of weakness. From this comes the rule that organizes the entire book. The victorious army wins first and seeks battle afterward. The doomed army rushes into battle first and only then goes looking for victory inside it. Winning is not what happens when the armies finally collide. It is what has already happened in preparation before they ever meet. Sun Tzu even gives the process a chain. The terrain dictates measurements, measurement gives rise to estimates of quantity, quantity to calculation, calculation to the balancing of chances, and that balance to victory itself. A victorious force set against a beaten one is like a full weight dropped against a single grain, and when it finally moves, it moves like water long held back, bursting into a chasm 1,000 fathoms deep. Chapter 5. Energy. Command a huge army the way you would command a handful of men. The only real difference, Sun Tzu says, is dividing them into parts and giving each a signal to obey. Control is a matter of structure, not of shouting. Once the structure holds, the army can absorb the full shock of an attack and not break, and it does so through two forces that run beneath the entire book: the direct and the indirect. You engage with the direct, the expected, the frontal blow. You win with the indirect, the unexpected, the oblique, the strike from the flank no one was watching. And the two are inexhaustible. There are only 5 musical notes, yet their combinations are more than any ear could ever hear. Only 5 colors, yet they yield more shades than the eye can see. Only 5 basic tastes, yet they make more flavors than the tongue can name. So it is with these two forces. They give birth to each other in an endless circle, and no one can ever exhaust their combinations. Then the chapter becomes physical, almost athletic. The onrush of good troops is like a torrent that rolls boulders along in its current. Timing is like the swoop of a falcon, brief, perfectly placed. The prey struck dead before it knows it is hunted. Energy, Sun Tzu says, is like a drawn crossbow, and decision is the release of the trigger. You build the tension, you hold it, and you loose it at the single right instant. There is a deeper trick underneath this, too. Apparent chaos can hide perfect order. A show of fear can hide real courage. A display of weakness can mask great strength. So the skilled commander stages disorder to lure the enemy, dangles a sacrifice the enemy lunges at, and keeps picked troops waiting exactly where the enemy will arrive. And here is the chapter's quiet revolution about leadership. The clever commander looks for victory in the momentum of the whole, not in the brilliance of any one soldier, and so he does not demand heroics from individuals. He arranges them. Under good command, men become like logs and stones, motionless on level ground, but rolling the instant you set them on a slope. The energy of a well-placed force is the momentum of a round boulder rolled down a mountain thousands of feet high. You do not push each stone by hand. You choose the mountain. Chapter 6. Weak points and strong. Energy has to be aimed somewhere, and this chapter is about where. Get to the battlefield first and wait, and you fight fresh. Arrive late and rushed, and you fight already tired. That small edge in timing is the seed of a much larger idea. The skilled commander imposes his will on the enemy and never lets the enemy's will be imposed on him. He decides where the fight happens and when. He draws the enemy toward him by dangling an advantage, or keeps him away by threatening harm. If the enemy is rested, he wears him out. If well fed, he starves him. If settled, he forces him to move. The method is to appear where the enemy must answer and to march where he does not expect you. An army can cross great distances without exhaustion if it travels where no enemy stands in the way. So attack only what cannot be defended, and hold only what cannot be attacked. The finest commander leaves his opponent not knowing what to protect or where the blow will land. Sun Tzu reaches almost for the mystical here. Be so subtle as to be formless, so quiet as to be soundless, and you will hold the enemy's fate in your hands. This is the real engine of the chapter. By staying hidden while forcing the enemy to reveal himself, you keep your forces gathered while his are scattered. You become one, he splits into 10. Then your whole strikes a fraction of his many against few, at the single point you have chosen. And because he cannot know where you will strike, he is forced to defend everywhere. Strengthen the front and the rear goes thin, reinforce the left and the right turns weak. The man who tries to be strong everywhere, by his own hand, becomes weak everywhere. The chapter closes on its most beautiful image. Military tactics are like water. Water flows away from high ground and rushes toward the low. War turns away from the enemy's strength and strikes at his weakness. Water keeps no constant shape. It takes the form of the ground beneath it. War keeps no constant conditions. It takes the shape of the enemy standing in front of it. The commander who changes with his opponent and wins by that change, Sun Tzu calls a heaven-born captain. Nothing here is rigid. The whole art is to stay liquid while forcing the enemy to harden. Chapter 7. Maneuvering. The hardest thing in war, Sun Tzu says, is to make the crooked road arrive before the straight one, to turn a long detour into a shortcut, and a misfortune into a gain. You set out after the enemy and reach the goal ahead of him, because you understood the ground and he did not. But maneuver carries a price, and the chapter is unusually honest about it. Speed and force pull against each other. Race a fully equipped army forward to snatch an advantage, and you arrive too late. Strip it down for speed, and you abandon your supplies. Drive the men 100 li without rest, and the strong outrun the weak until only a tenth of them reach the goal, and your commanders are captured along the way. Push 50 li and only half the force arrives, 30 li and 2/3. An army without its baggage, its food, its bases of supply, is simply lost. Then comes the most quoted passage of the chapter, a portrait of an army that has mastered tempo. Let your speed be the wind. Let your stillness be the forest. In raiding, be fire. In holding ground, be the mountain, immovable. Be as hard to read as darkness, and when you strike, fall like the thunderbolt. Because a single voice cannot carry across a battlefield, armies use gongs and drums, banners and flags, not as decoration, but as a shared nervous system that lets thousands act as one body, so that the brave cannot charge off alone and the fearful cannot flee alone. With that unity established, Sun Tzu turns to the enemy's mind. A whole army can be robbed of its spirit, and its commander of his presence of mind. Morale has a daily tide. Keenest in the morning, flagging by noon, all but gone by evening, when men think only of their camp. So the clever general avoids the enemy when his spirit is sharp and strikes when it has dulled. He stays calm and disciplined and waits for the enemy to fall into confusion. He stays close and rested while the enemy wears himself ragged. And he ends with a handful of hard cautions that read like the scars of old campaigns. Do not climb to attack an enemy on high ground. Do not chase a flight that is too convenient, it is bait. When you surround an army, always leave it a way out, because a trapped enemy with nothing left to lose fights like a cornered animal. Do not press a desperate foe too hard. Mercy here is not softness. It is arithmetic. Chapter 8. Variation of Tactics. Every rule in this book has an exception, and this short chapter is where Sun Tzu says so out loud. The art of command is not memorizing tactics. It is knowing when to break them. There are roads you must not take, even when they lie open. There are armies you must not attack, even when you could. Towns you must not besiege, ground you must not fight for, and there are orders from your own sovereign that you must not obey, because the man standing in the field can see what the man back on the throne cannot. A general who knows the terrain perfectly but cannot vary his plan to fit it is holding knowledge he is unable to use. Behind every decision, Sun Tzu places a single habit of mind. Weigh advantage and disadvantage together, always, in the same breath. Inside a real opportunity, look for the hidden cost. Inside a real difficulty, look for the hidden opening. That is how you keep moving when things go wrong. From this follows one of the steadiest lines in the book. Do not count on the enemy not coming. Count on your own readiness to meet him. Do not pin your hopes on his not attacking. Make your own position one that cannot be attacked. Security is something you build, never something you are simply granted. The chapter then turns the lens around, away from the enemy and onto the commander himself, and it becomes unervingly modern. There are 5 faults that can destroy a general, each one a weakness an enemy can turn against him. recklessness which gets him killed, cowardice which gets him captured, a hot temper which can be provoked by a single insult, too fine a sense of honor, which makes him easy to shame into a blunder, and too much love for his men, which an enemy can exploit by threatening them until he abandons his plan to save them. When an army is destroyed and its leader killed, Sun Tzu says, the cause will almost always be found among these 5. The most dangerous terrain a commander ever crosses is his own character. Chapter 9. The Army on the March. This is the chapter where the general becomes a reader of signs. Sun Tzu begins with ground. Cross mountains quickly and keep to the valleys. Camp on high places facing the sun, and never fight your way uphill. After fording a river, put plenty of distance behind it. And when the enemy comes over one to reach you, never meet him midstream. Let half his army get clear of the water, then strike while the crossing still splits his force. Healthy ground is high, dry, and sunny, and an army kept on it stays free of disease. But the true heart of this chapter is observation. A whole army betrays its intentions to a commander who knows how to look. Dust rising in a high, narrow column means chariots are coming. Low and spread wide, it means infantry. Scattered in thin streaks, it means foraging parties. Birds suddenly rising mark an ambush lying in wait below. When the enemy's envoys speak humbly while his army keeps building, he is about to attack. When they talk big and push forward as if to strike, he is about to retreat. Soldiers leaning on their spears are starving. Men who rush to drink the moment they draw water tell you the whole army is parched. Too many rewards mean the commander is desperate. Too many punishments mean he is exhausted. Birds gathering on a position mean it has been abandoned. None of it is magic, it is attention, the discipline of reading what an enemy reveals without ever meaning to. The chapter then closes on the army's own discipline, and it is humane and hard at the same time. Numbers alone settle nothing. Reckless contempt for an underestimated enemy is the surest way to be captured. Punish soldiers before they have come to trust you and they will only resent you. Fail to punish them once they do trust you, and they become useless. So lead them with humanity but hold them with iron discipline. Treat them well, and enforce the rules without exception. That blend, Sun Tzu says, is the certain road to an army that will follow you anywhere. Chapter 10. Terrain. Sun Tzu draws a hard line in this chapter, and it falls squarely on the commander. He maps 6 kinds of ground. Open ground both sides can cross freely. Entangling ground easy to leave but hard to get back to. Ground where neither side gains by moving first. Narrow passes, steep heights, and country so distant that forcing a battle costs more than it could ever return. Each kind demands a different answer. Take the high, sunny side first, guard your line of supply, and never commit to ground you cannot leave. But terrain is only the setup for the chapter's real subject, which is responsibility. An army, Sun Tzu says, can suffer 6 disasters that owe nothing to heaven and everything to its general. When troops flee a force 10 times their size, when strong soldiers are saddled with weak officers or strong officers with weak soldiers, when senior commanders attack in a rage before the order is given, when a general who cannot read the enemy throws the weak against the strong. These are not bad luck. They are failures of command, and naming them that way is the entire point. From this comes the most independent line in the book. If the situation guarantees victory, you must fight even if the ruler forbids it. If it guarantees defeat, you must not fight even if he commands it. The general's loyalty is to the outcome, not to the order. And that loyalty has a moral shape. The commander who advances without hunting for glory and retreats without fearing disgrace, whose only thought is to protect his people and serve his sovereign, is the jewel of the kingdom. Care for your soldiers as if they were your own beloved sons, and they will follow you into the deepest valley and stand by you unto death. But there is a warning folded inside the tenderness. Indulge them without authority, and they curdle into spoiled children, useless the moment it matters. The chapter ends by widening the book's most famous maxim. Know the enemy and know yourself, and your victory is not in doubt. Know the ground and know the heavens as well, and your victory can be made complete. Chapter 11. The 9 Situations. This is the longest chapter in the book, and the most psychological. Sun Tzu lists 9 kinds of ground an army can find itself on, from dispersive ground, your own home territory, where men fight with little heart because safety is near, through contentious ground worth seizing, and serious ground deep inside enemy country, all the way to desperate ground, where the only road out leads straight through the fight. Each ground carries its own rule. On dispersive ground, do not fight. On desperate ground, fight. But the further Sun Tzu goes, the more the chapter becomes about the human heart under pressure. Rapidity, he says, is the very essence of war. Come by routes the enemy never watches, and strike where he keeps no guard. And if you face a large, well-ordered enemy on the point of advancing, begin by seizing something he cannot afford to lose. All at once, he is reacting to you. Then comes the chapter's unsettling core. Throw your soldiers into a place from which there is no escape, and they will choose death over flight. Men in a desperate position stop feeling fear. With no refuge, they hold firm. With no choice left, they fight with everything they have. And a good general will sometimes engineer that desperation on purpose. He leads his men deep into hostile country and then, in the image Sun Tzu makes unforgettable, he burns the boats and breaks the cooking pots, so that there is nothing left to retreat to. Place an army in deadly peril and it survives. Plunge it into a hopeless position, and it comes through safe. 2 images carry the chapter. The skilled army moves like the Shuiran, a serpent of the Chang Mountains. Strike its head and the tail whips around. Strike its tail and the head comes. Strike the middle and both ends strike at once. That is what total coordination looks like. And the men of Wu and the men of Yu were old enemies. Yet put them in the same boat in a storm, and they will help each other like the left hand helps the right. Shared danger does what no command ever could. The general who leads them stays quiet and unreadable, keeping even his own officers in the dark, shifting camp and changing routes so that no one, friend or enemy, can guess his design. He shows his men the deed, never the plan. And the chapter ends on a piece of timing shaped like a closing trap. At first, be shy as a maiden, until the enemy relaxes and leaves a door open. Then move with the speed of a hare, and he will be far too late to shut it. Chapter 12. The Attack by Fire. It begins as a manual for arson and ends as a meditation on anger. Sun Tzu lists 5 targets for fire. Burn the enemy in his camp, burn his stores, burn his supply trains, burn his arsenals, and hurl fire into his ranks. But fire is never improvised. You need the means kept ready in advance, the dry season, and the days when the wind rises, and once a fire takes hold, you must read it, not merely light it. If flames break out inside the enemy's camp, attack at once from the outside. But if his soldiers stay strangely calm, bide your time and do not attack. Always keep to the windward side. Never attack from the leeward, into your own smoke and flame. Fire used well, Sun Tzu notes, multiplies the force of an attack, and water can do something similar. Water can cut an enemy off, though it cannot consume his supplies the way fire does. And then, without warning, the chapter turns from tactics to temperament, and that turn is why it has lasted. A victory won and never consolidated, he says, is simply wasted, the mark of a leader who keeps lighting fires and never finishes what they begin. Move only when there is real advantage. Commit your troops only when there is something genuine to gain. Fight only when the position is truly critical. And above all this, no ruler should ever send an army into the field merely to gratify his own anger, and no general should fight a battle out of wounded pride. This is the line that lifts the chapter clean out of its own century. Anger can cool back into good humor, and resentment can fade into contentment. Feelings pass. But a kingdom once destroyed can never be brought back into being, and the dead can never be returned to life. A decision made in rage is the one kind of damage that does not reverse. So the enlightened ruler stays careful, and the good general stays wary, and that caution, Sun Tzu says, is what keeps a country whole and an army intact. The most violent chapter in the book closes on the coldest restraint. Chapter 13. The Use of Spies. The book ends on its least romantic and most modern idea, that wars are won by information. Sun Tzu opens with the bill. To raise an army of 100,000 and march it to a distant front drains the state of 1,000 ounces of silver a day. It also upends the lives of 700,000 households. Armies may stand facing each other for years, and the whole contest is decided in a single day. Given that, he says, to lose because you were too cheap to pay for good intelligence is the very height of inhumanity, and the mark of no true leader at all. So everything turns on where reliable foreknowledge comes from. Not from the spirits and not from omens. Not from reasoning by analogy with past events, and not from any calculation. It can come only from people who actually know the enemy's situation. That is the whole argument for espionage, and it is startlingly secular for its age. Sun Tzu then sorts spies into 5 kinds. Local spies, drawn from the enemy's own population. Inward spies, officials already inside the enemy's government. Converted spies, the enemy's own agents, turned to work for you. Doomed spies, fed false information to carry across, often at the cost of their lives. And surviving spies who go in and come back with news. When all 5 operate at once, no one can trace the pattern. Sun Tzu calls it the divine manipulation of the threads, and a ruler's most precious gift. Of the 5, one matters more than the rest. The converted spy, the enemy's agent turned double. Through him you find and recruit all the others. Through him your false information reaches the enemy disguised as truth. So he must be treated with the greatest generosity of all. The single most valuable person in the entire army is the one who used to work for the other side. The book then closes with a turn to history. 2 of China's founding dynasties, Sun Tzu reminds his reader, rose through a man who had first served the very enemy he later helped destroy. History's most effective agents were insiders of exactly this kind. Placed, patient, and trusted, men who had lived within the enemy's house long before they helped bring it down. Be subtle, he urges. Be subtle and use spies in every kind of business. For all the chapters on terrain and fire and maneuver, the army's ability to move at all rests on this one thing. Knowing, before you act, what the enemy does not yet know you know.